Welcome to today's Global Connections program. I'm Bill Miller. What are some of the major energy, economic development, and health issues and problems confronting several African countries? What is one former National Football League player and his organization doing to provide assistance to these countries? We'll be back in just a moment to talk about these and other important issues. Welcome back to our program. Today we're going to take a look at a very unique organization, the World Education Foundation, and what it's doing to provide assistance to several African countries. My guest today is an expert on the issues as well as the foundation. My guest today is Mr. Marques D. Anderson. Marques D. Anderson is a former National Football League player and is the founder director of the World Education Foundation. Marques earned a master's degree at Linköping University in Sweden in adult learning and global change. Marques began his professional career working in the National Football League as an American football safety, being drafted by the Green Bay Packers in 2002 and playing until 2006. Marques Anderson, welcome to today's Global Connections program.
All right, thank you for having me, Bill.
I appreciate you being with me today.
I'm glad to
well,
be
I'd
here.
like to talk about football, but that's important. But let's talk about, we may get to that at the end, but let's talk about the World Education Foundation. When was it formed? Why was it formed? What's its basic mission?
Yeah, so it was formed actually in 2010 after I retired from the National Football League. And it's really to focus on 5 main pillars, which are energy, education, health, infrastructure, and sports. It's really to serve as a platform to bring peace through education. So we really focus on developing projects that are specific to communities on a global basis, particularly in the global South and the Middle East.
Now you're working, well, as you mentioned, in the global South, primarily in African countries and the Middle East. You've got a litany, a long list of very interesting and very important projects that are underway. Let's get into these in just a moment, and you can tell me how you picked them and what the main purpose is. Now you've got the World Education Malaria Project. Call it WE. It's the acronym WE. What is the World Malaria Project and where does it operate?
Yeah, so it was actually spawned from a shared cab in Argentina. I started talking to a woman about health issues. She put me in contact with a gentleman who's doing a food production program in the DR Congo. And I asked him what the most pressing health issues were, and malaria came up. So we came up with an actual program that helped rural farmers actually cultivate and transport quinine bark into the main city of Bukavu to be actually processed into malaria tablets. It was actually started in 2011, and from there we've been able to create about 110 jobs and about 400,000 treatments for malaria.
Now, how do you pick your countries? How do you, there are many areas of the world where you can go. There are many problems, many issues around.
For sure. Well, you know, it's really about word of mouth. You know, I really like to engage in communities that I go to. You know, when I got out of the league, I traveled around the world a lot, you know, really just being with the people. And a lot of them were actually suggested to me, referenced to me. And then we definitely don't take on projects unless I actually have a foothold and I know what's going on in the local communities. So a lot of scouting, a lot of identifying what the problems are, and then a lot of engagement through the narratives of the community.
Okay. And if our viewers would like more information, they can go to the worldeducationfoundation.com and get more information about what we're talking about today and all of your programs, I would imagine.
That's correct.
Okay, very good. Yeah. Let's talk about energy, and we have an energy crisis around the world. We're dealing with climate change. We'll get into that as we go through the program. But you also have one, it's the WE Biodiesel Project. What exactly is that?
So that's a mobilization of about 3,000 farmers, really focused on oil-based crops. And I'm not saying that biodiesel should be scaled up on a large scale, but it works for this particular region in the east of the DR Congo due to the fact that their fossil diesels are sourced from the Middle East, dropped off in Mombasa, Kenya, and then transported about 1,500 kilometers through some volatile supply chain to get into the DR Congo. So being able to actually grow their fuels, their energy, and then also integrate that with food crops, it allows them the capacity to build out their energy, as well as if there is a surplus, then they can actually export it into neighboring countries.
So they take care of the food needs of the people first, and then whatever's left over, you can convert it into some type of energy.
Definitely. You know, food and health is definitely our main concern first and foremost. And then if we can integrate different type of energy solutions into that, then we definitely take a look at that.
Exactly. Now you're living in Norway, I believe, right? Oslo, Norway right now, and you're probably reading about what goes on in the United States, but there's been a sort of a raging debate, especially in Iowa with the biofuels and that type of thing, and they're looking at how they can make sure that there's enough food for everybody, and then if there's any left over to use in this particular capacity.
Yeah, so we actually don't use food crops, so we don't use corn.
Oh, you don't use food crops?
We don't use food crops.
Oh, okay.
Yeah, so we're actually using jatropha as well as a candlenut tree, which is indigenous to Hawaii, that actually has about 40% oil within its fruit. So that is something that we definitely were considering when we were looking at the project. So water, land, as well as food production was one of our key indicators in what we looked at in approaching this project.
Now you work, I'm assuming, in tandem with other groups. Do you have partners you work with on this as far as perhaps funders, or I don't know if you work with any of the United Nations agencies or with the UN Foundation? They're big in malaria project. The National Basketball Association has a program that is focusing on malaria, as I recall, providing nets in the that will help people not to contract malaria. Do you have various partners you work with?
Yeah, so the Wii Foundation actually focuses on bridging the gap between academic knowledge and implementation. So we are partnered with a lot of universities, a lot of expert institutions. One of the things actually getting into the malaria project, I went back to my alma mater, which was UCLA. I hired a couple of interns from the School of Public Affairs, and we came up with the project actually together in order to create the malaria project. So really looking at that academic institution as well as expert institutions, whether it be in design, whether it be in creating new projects or academic knowledge. That knowledge mobilization is really what we focus on.
That is very important. It's very good. And to bring people in who have the expertise and the resources who can be of assistance to you. So that is very, very important.
For sure. And you know, there's a lot of, in the academic realm, there's a lot of PhDs, there's a lot of professors, there's a lot of students that come up with some very brilliant solutions to the most pressing issues that we have. Sometimes it gets stuck in the academic space, so what we do is really try to harness that knowledge that has been created and really bring that to some of the most vulnerable communities in the world.
Now, of course, a key player today, and more so in the future, are the youth. They're the ones who are going to be the leaders of tomorrow. They're the ones who will be combating climate change more so than we are today. You've got a youth program in the Sahel region of Africa. First off, where's the Sahel region in Africa, and what is this youth program about?
So the Sahel region is right above sub-Saharan Africa, and I was actually focusing on Morocco as well as Algeria and the refugee camps there. And I really wanted to approach this particular project just due to the fact that the international community had not been talking about this specific region. And the youth there, this is actually in Tindouf, have been living there for about 40 years now. So when you're looking at generational type of capacity building, you definitely want to start with the youth. And for this particular project, the conflict is really what attracted me to this. And not only that, but there's a physical wall, a physical divide that goes about 2,700 kilometers from the middle of Morocco all the way down to Mauritania, which has about 5 million landmines on both sides. So really looking at engaging the youth to actually work together to create solutions and actually capacity build in order to create brighter futures for both sides.
And is the political situation getting closer to resolution, or what's the status right now?
Yeah, I kind of stay away from the political
exactly
from the
right,
political,
because it will change tomorrow.
Exactly, from the political solution, but I really focus on the youth and capacity building. So no matter what happens politically, you know, the youth actually have some livelihoods, or they have some type of creation that they can actually look forward to in the future.
How do you determine the effectiveness of your programs? Everybody wants to measure to make sure that the program's reaching their targeted audience, they're achieving the goals of the program. How do you do that?
Yeah. By smiles, Bill.
By smiles.
But we do have qualitative and quantitative indicators that we look after, really going up against a framework that we have for our base research. And then we also are working with a couple of mathematicians as well as big data scientists that can look at how do we create algorithms in order to simulate interventions, and not only that, but use predictive analysis in order to see what those key indicators are once we actually make an intervention.
That's very important to do that. Now, you've got another project, it's the American Football Project in Eastern Africa. Which are the countries in Eastern Africa? That's a big area. Which countries are involved in that, and how is that program undertaken?
Yeah. So actually, by traveling throughout South America as well as Africa, one of the engagements that I really loved was introducing American football into these communities. So really focusing on the DR Congo, we started up a couple of different American football programs, and then also working in Kenya and some of the slums in Kibera. By introducing this is really a great way to have engagement, have trust, build that trust, and then ultimately get the eyes and the ears of the local community in order to tackle some of the bigger and larger issues within the community. So, you know, we've been able to introduce the game to about 2,000 youth across the continents of South America and Africa.
Exactly. And when we talk about football, normally overseas we're talking about soccer. That's what they're talking about. They say football. But now we're talking about American football, which is totally different from soccer.
Yeah.
It's still a lot of exercise, but the way you play it is a bit different.
Definitely.
How is that taking root? Is that very popular? I know soccer is probably the most popular sport in the world, I would imagine, or at least that's what some of the commentators say. But how is American football blending in or taking off, and is it getting more popular?
Yeah, as you can tell, I'm trained to say American football, because
exactly.
when I go over to Europe and I'm in Africa, they're like, football? No, that's soccer. You know, but it's taking off. You know, kids around the world, they're very intrigued and they're eager to learn new sports. You know, some of the communities that I go into, actually one of the first international trips to Lagos, Nigeria, actually while I was at UCLA, was through an organization called Athletes in Action, and we introduced the game of American football to these communities, and the way that they picked it up, the way that they actually engaged with the game, I was quite impressed, you know, how quickly they are able to take direction, you know, and building the American football out on these continents would only help to actually source more talent, you know, for America and where it's played around the world.
Well, you're watching Global Connections Television, which is an independently produced program. The opinions expressed on Global Connections are solely those of the moderator and his guest. We would invite our viewers to go to www.globalconnectionstelevision.com to view previous programs. Also, we would encourage you to make suggestions for future guests and future topics. Today, we're taking a look at the World Education Foundation and the role it is playing in a wide range of countries in Africa to provide assistance in the area of sports, economic development, health, and energy. My guest today is an expert on this particular program. My guest today is Marques D. Anderson. Mr. Anderson is a former National Football League player and is the founder director of the World Education Foundation. Marques, we're talking about a variety of programs. We're kind of blowing through these very quickly because you've got so many programs underway. I'm just curious, how large is your staff? I mean, you have people, I'm sure you have volunteers, as you mentioned, in various countries who work with you, but do you have a ballpark figure of how many are out there around the continent or and other areas of the world?
Yeah, so we really like to engage with local communities, you know, really try to build the capacity there. So it depends on which project that we're working on. In Norway, we're actually creating a special chapter for the World Education Foundation Foundation, which is going to be sourced out of Norway. And we have about 6 strong members and staff that are working through there. And really it's focused on local engagement. And the acronym WE is very important to us, as we don't like to reinvent the wheel every time we approach a project. So we like to collaborate with a lot of different type of organizations, particularly customized to that particular region. So it's not, solely just in-house from the World Education Foundation, but we bring a collective of different organizations together to approach some of these pressing problems.
And of course, that acronym certainly is trademarkable and copyrightable, and it also it's inclusive. It is we. It's like us. Yeah. We are all in it together and working on this project and helping to create this better society. That leads me into another question. It's more of a theoretical question, I guess. What is your, and you've been talking about it to a large degree, what is your concept of development? You have this broad view of development. What is it that drives the World Education Foundation in developing your approach to development in general?
Yeah. It really starts with the people. First and foremost, it starts with the people. And we really like to identify the problems. And then once we identify, we scout. We do our due diligence. And once we actually do our due diligence, we really like to partner with locals. And then once we partner with the locals, we go into experiencing and training with the locals. And then from there, we build through design. We really like to get our hands dirty and start to create prototypes for these particular small scale, programs, and then kind of grow them organically, seeing and iterating and identifying what those projects and on-ramps actually look like. And then ultimately, we like to collect our data and sift through it, come up with the best solutions, and then we like to share our data. So like I mentioned before, we're not reinventing the wheel in the developmental industry.
Exactly. Now, I mentioned earlier climate change is probably the #1 issue confronting everybody on planet Earth, all 7.3 billion people. Now, you've got a program, and this may deal with it, and we'll find out in a minute, but I want to make sure I get it right. We Solve Solution Vortex Environment. What exactly is that program?
Yeah, so it's an incubation center that we're actually setting up in a refugee camp in Iraq. So that is actually focused on creating an open space for local youth to solve local problems, really giving them the capacity to operate through a design thinking approach where it takes their ideas and sees them all the way through to their implementation stage. So actually we just ran a workshop in the refugee camps this summer, really identifying, we taught the youth actually how to do a needs assessment. They went into their local community, they gathered their data, came back, and we ran them through a prototype where they actually had the idea, they had asked a hypothesis, and then they had the big questions and assumptions, and then they were actually able to create a prototype for their solution. So this is really an incubation center that we can actually move in different vulnerable communities around the world to share knowledge as well as to create different on-ramps for job creation and new markets.
You mentioned sharing information, which is very important. You have a prototype of a lot of programs, a lot of projects that are really replicable and are very successful and can be utilized. Do you know of other places, other institutions, other groups that are looking at what you're doing and maybe trying something like that in another part of the continent or another part of the world?
Yeah. So yeah, we're actually, in May, I was in Kolwezi, which is right on the Copper Belt in the DR Congo. And we're working with an organization called the Good Shepherd Sisters. And our focus is really creating artisanal miners, giving them the capacity to have alternative livelihoods than just mining. So we're really looking at farming, we're looking at replicable ways to do micro enterprise, and then we're also looking at different ways to have on-ramps where they can create their own projects that they're interested in to identify the problems which most, they're dealing with the most from a day-to-day basis. So, yeah.
Yes. Now, climate change, again, we go back to that. You're bringing this into your discussions? I mean, you're in the various projects that you've undertaken, you're talking about climate change, you're looking at ways to perhaps move off of fossil fuels in some areas, or encourage people to look at alternative green forms of energy to deal with a problem that's with us. It's not going to be tomorrow, it's here today, but it's going to get worse tomorrow.
For sure. Yeah, definitely. You know, one of the projects that we actually approached last year was in collaboration with a couple of gentlemen out of the UN, some senior advisors. It's called the Wii Haiti Project. And we were looking at identifying ways that we could actually mitigate the local population cutting down trees for charcoal. So looking at different ways in actually creating coconut husk briquettes in order to have an alternative renewable fuel that can ultimately serve as cooking fuel for local populations there in Haiti.
Mm-hmm. You mentioned earlier you had traveled to, I believe, in 2007 to South America, in 2010 maybe to Europe, and this was more of a fact-finding trip, or trips, I should say, plural, that you went and you interacted with a variety of people who were into sustainable development, business people, governmental people. What was the really the purpose of those two trips, and what was the final outcome?
Yeah. So, you know, my mentor, who actually was out of the Netherlands, is a Dutch aviation gentleman who I met actually when I was playing for the Denver Broncos. And after I actually stopped playing, I traveled around Europe for about 10 months, really just to, like you said, fact find. Really, he introduced me to a lot of people in the developmental world, a lot of people in research and development, a lot of people in sustainable energy. And it really sparked my interest in order to look at what I wanted to do with the WE Foundation. So I traveled after my master's to South America, really just to be with the people, really to kind of have those general conversations and really get a firsthand look what it was like to be on the ground with the people. So if it's, you know, hugging babies, if it's sharing dinner, sharing meals, really just getting those narratives and looking at that ancient wisdom that's actually built in these communities. A lot of people think that, you know, just because they are a developing country, there's not a lot of sustainability, but a lot of these communities have been effective and been around for, you know, thousands of years. So really trying to get what those core values are in order to see if we could scale those. That was really my mission for some of those trips.
Mm-hmm. And again, our viewers can go to worldeducationfoundation.com and get much more information about what we're talking about today. And you made we made several important points, but the last one was how we can learn from one another.
Yes.
And the people living overseas in other parts of the world, in developing countries, the South, they have very good ideas on how to deal with these problems. Folks in developed countries have good ideas, and we need to have a two-way communication and to share information and to pool our resources to focus on these problems, because we are in it together. The whole world is in it together.
For sure, you know, it is a collective, you know, and some of the actual solutions that I saw around the world in a lot of these communities, there's some brilliant individuals in these communities, and in order to have that exchange where it's not just linear, so it's not, you know, the developing world telling the underdeveloped world or the developing world how to operate, but it's really about exchanging that knowledge and really creating new platforms in order to create future projects that are sustainable, that we're all going to be affected by and actually impact all of us.
Mm-hmm. And there's another website, I believe you have, WE, is that correct? Is there a second website?
Well, we can actually be found on Twitter at we_e_foundation.
Oh,
so
okay.
yeah, we have a lot of updates there.
Okay.
But yeah, our main website is theworldeducationfoundation.com.
Okay.
Yeah.
We were talking about the conceptual approach to how you developed your foundation and your developmental thinking, and a book that you had read years ago, Natural Capitalism, Creating the Next Industrial Revolution, written by Paul Hawken. It had a tremendous role to play in this. What exactly is natural capitalism, and what did you garner or glean from this particular book that tied into what you did or what you wanted to do?
Yeah. So when I was transitioning out of the league, I was just really researching a lot of different individuals that had gone before, you know, and Paul Hawken really stood out to me because he took an approach and he started to look at how commerce had an effect on living systems. And through that, now Paul Hawken, he's an environmentalist and entrepreneur as well as a writer who talked about different ways how the economic model of of capitalism is starting to become outdated. And just due to the influx in the population of the world, it's no longer sustainable. We're, you know, having too many resources being utilized, being thrown away. So actually, how do we close the loop from using resources to where the effectiveness of our projects, of our products that we're actually bringing into this world have a very identifiable on-ramp into how those systems actually affect one another within the communities.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. And of course, the market economies are going to change, as we see with overpopulation, or maybe going in the other direction, moving downward with our population increase. But it looks like we're going forward with the climate change, with the use of fossil fuels, the moving to clean energy, with overfishing in the oceans. These are all going to impact us without a doubt. They are today, and it's actually going to happen. Well, the final question, let me ask you, as you look over the horizon, what do you see as your main challenge as to what you would like to do in the future?
Yeah. So technology is becoming ubiquitous around the world and connective. There's not been a time in history where people, information, and resources have been connected. And what we really want to focus on is bridging that gap, you know, in between the academic, the solution-based organizations and implementation into some of these vulnerable communities. We're also looking at different currencies, you know, looking at how that tool can actually be utilized to break down some of the barriers of the disparities that are going on around the world. How do we actually mobilize this knowledge as well as resources in order to look forward into the future and ultimately give the youth a platform to create the future cities in which we'll live in, and also manufacture some of the human experiences that we live in. You know, when we start talking about, you know, artificial intelligence, you know, these are barriers that we've never touched before. So how do those play out in actually creating a more sustainable world is really what we're going to be focused on in the future.
Mm-hmm. Well, Marques Anderson, you've really done a tremendous amount with this organization you created. And of course, you launched it, I guess, back when you were playing with the National Football League, and then you moved out and became the founder and the director now of the World Education Foundation. And you have a wide range of projects in so many different countries. And again, so many of these are good prototypes. These are good models that other folks can look at and say, you know, this is something that we need to be doing in our country. This is something that we need to be doing in our community, whatever the case might be, and to look at them and to incorporate these ideas because, as you say, we don't want to reinvent the wheel. That's not what we're about. And Marques Anderson, I want to thank you so very much for a very interesting and a very informative program.
Yeah, thank you very much.
Thank you. I'm Bill Miller. Thank you for joining us today on Global Connections Television.